Welcome to Home for the Holidays, how to discuss finances with family. My name is Tony Jennings Hodge, and I have the pleasure of being your host this evening. Just a little bit about me. I am a member of the Xi Omega chapter, and I'm also an attorney at Wilson Sonsini, just a law firm famously known for launching Google and Apple's IPO, and also most recently representing Twitter, now known as X, in their acquisition by Elon Musk. And I happen to be a corporate specialist that specializes in employee benefits, so 401k plans, pension plans, health and welfare plans, and things like that, and I make sure that those plans are appropriately delegated during those acquisitions so that people like yourself have money so that you can meet your financial goals and also estate plan. So I am not only here to host, but I'm here to learn a lot and listen. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Do you all know that American retirees expect to transfer more than $36 million to their families, friends, nonprofits, and additional beneficiaries over the next 30 years? This is according to seniorliving.com. In addition, 56% of Americans believe that estate planning is important. However, only 1 in 3 people actually have an estate planner. Estate planning is essential. So that's why we are having this 1 hour program today. So just a few housekeeping reminders. All audience members, as you enter, will automatically be placed on mute. However, if you do have any questions or you experience any technical difficulties, please feel free to use the Q&A button. So we are happy to have you here and happy to serve. With that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Jeray J. Stevens. Jay Stevens is an award-winning leader in finance and the founder of Rich Like My Melanin, a financial literacy organization that transforms complex financial concepts into easy and actionable plans. Jay earned her Bachelor of Science in International Business from Furman University during the peak of the 2008 financial crisis. So she has an up-close and intimate relationship with debt and economic volatility. She went on to earn her MBA in finance from Howard University and embarked on a 15-year career in corporate finance, including management roles at Deloitte, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and the U.S. Navy. Severely underpaid and burdened with student loan debt, Jay focused on growing her financial position by paying off $50,000 in debt, doubling her salary, and purchasing her second investment property in less than 8 months. Through her work on financial literacy with Rich Like My Melanin, Jay earned the 2022 Community Changemaker Award from Chime Bank for her commitment to financial literacy and community service. Welcome, Jay Stevens.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate the energy that you gave in giving my introduction. I appreciate it. And I am happy and grateful to serve with you in Xi Omega. So, good evening, everyone. We want this to be an interactive webinar, tongue-tied. Whether you are multitasking, cooking dinner, working out, sitting in traffic, or just fully focused on this panel right now, we want you to feel encouraged to participate. So you can use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the chat. We really do want you, throughout the conversation, we really want you to get as much information as we can slot into this 60-minute window. So we'll get started by continuing the introductions and bringing on our panelists. First, we have Chelsea Ransom Cooper, a certified financial planner and director of financial planning at Zenith Wealth Partners. In 2020, Chelsea partnered to create Zenith Wealth, a financial planning and investment advisory firm on a mission to eliminate systemic racial and gender wealth inequality. Prior to joining Zenith as co-owner and managing partner, Chelsea spent several years as a financial planner serving families with investment portfolios upwards of $1 million. While working in an industry traditionally gatekept for wealthy retirees, Chelsea realized that she could get help for more diverse clientele and make life-changing financial decisions even before reaching retirement. In parallel to growing the overall firm, Chelsea has never lost focus on her primary audience, her clients. She specializes in working with women founders and executives by guiding them through the many financial decisions they face as women with ambitious goals. Chelsea has appeared in national publications such as CNBC, NPR, MarketWatch, and the Wall Street Journal across a variety of platforms, including podcasts and social media. In 2020 and 2022, she was recognized by the Association of African American Financial Advisors, Quad A, as one of the 50 outstanding financial advisors under 50. That's right, she hit that 50 under 50 list. And she's well under 50, y'all. So she's gonna hit it a few more times. She was also recognized by Investment News 40 under 40. NerdWallet is one of the 9 Black financial influencers to follow, and the Financial Advisor magazine as a young advisor to watch in 2023. Let us welcome Chelsea. I'm doing the claps with trust. Everyone in the audience is clapping for you. Including our next panelist who's about to come up. Our next panelist is Portia Wood, a generational wealth planning attorney. Based in Los Angeles, she leads Wood Legal Group, LLP, an African-American woman-owned and operated law firm specializing in estate planning, probate, and elder law that she runs with her mother and law partner, Robin Wood. They are passionately focused on helping all families grow and protect wealth by being a trusted resource for accurate information and comprehensive, culturally competent estate planning. And she's being humble because she does so much. She's going to get into it. She really puts her money and her time where her mouth is. So we will now welcome Portia to the screen. Woo! Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are glad you are here. And I realized in my introduction, I talked about all the stuff I do in finance, but I should also share, I am the assistant treasurer of the Xi Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And as you can see across the top, it is our centennial year. So we are counting down to centennial. Now that we've properly introduced ourselves and I reintroduced myself, it's time to get to the panel discussion questions. And again, we have questions prepared, but please use the Q&A function. We want you to get all you can out of this. So we're going to start with the basics. Let's start from level 0, make sure everyone is on the same page. Chelsea, what is financial planning? Portia, what is estate planning? And if you can sprinkle in how they're similar or different. And we can start with Chelsea.
Awesome. Thank you for such a warm introduction, Jay. Super excited for this conversation. I have to say it's incredibly timely, but you brought up a great point, which is like, what is financial planning in the first place? And I think a lot of the times, sometimes people think it's retirement planning. Well, that is part of financial planning, but that's just a piece of it. Really what it is coming up with a plan and a structure around your entire financial life. So that includes retirement, insurance, taxes, planning for your kids, education, understanding a budget, how to pay down debt, how to invest, all of these pieces. And of course, we can't forget estate planning. So all of these pieces do fit into financial planning. And the purpose and the reason why financial planning is so important is because if we don't have a plan, how can we make sure that we're achieving the goals that we really want to? And that's the beauty of having a certified financial planner who can help you understand the technical aspects of the financial life, because it is very confusing, but can also then align this to what is important to you. What are your passions? What are your values? And making sure that you're working together in the right direction.
Perfect. And notice how she said certified, as in, like, don't just get information off of TikTok. go to someone certified and get it. You can that can be a good place to start the research. Don't end the research there. And Portia, excuse me for talking over you. You were about to give us the definition of estate planning, and how it differs from financial planning, and especially for you, because you always do a great job of answering this question. Why does it matter, especially in the Black community?
Yeah. Well, Jay, I just want to say thank you, and Tony, thank you, and thank you to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated for having this panel, because much like Chelsea said, it is so timely and important. Estate planning is really just the orderly distribution of your assets, right? Like that's what it is. It's having a plan for what happens with your stuff. Why is that important for the Black community? Well, we're failing at the inheritance game. We talk about the racial wealth gap, and we keep hearing all of these numbers being thrown around about how the racial wealth gap continues to grow despite educational achievements and home ownership achievements and X, Y, and Z. But yet we can't seem to close the racial wealth gap. And where we continuously and consistently lose is in the generational wealth transfer game. Because what the statistics show is that in 2017, they found that only 13% of college-educated African Americans were getting $10,000 or more to the next generation, which meant 87% of us, college-educated African Americans, were not even passing $10,000 worth of wealth to the next generation. The average amount passed was about $43,000, which is not even enough to pay off a 4-year tuition at a state school. So we pass negative wealth. right? Compared to our white contemporaries who are passing on average about $163,000, which is enough to pay off student loan debt, assuming there's debt at all, right? And put a down payment on an almost $600,000 house. What the numbers show is that we're failing. And so why is estate planning important? Having a plan for the orderly distribution of our assets, because our future generations, the lineages that come after us, are depending on us to make a plan. And so if we are going to change the tide around wealth in the Black community, it has to start with the foundation, and that foundation is the estate plan.
Perfect. Nailed it. Okay. So now that people know what it is, let's get to the nitty gritty of how do you do it. So I'll go back to Chelsea for this one. Walk me through the financial planning process. Does a person need to be uber rich? What does it entail? What do they need to be prepared to do when they come to the table and say, okay, I want to do some kind of financial planning?
Yeah, and I think that's a great conversation to start with, because I think even before people even get to estate planning, they need to have a better understanding of their overall financial life, and then what do they even have, and then what are their goals and what are they trying to achieve. I think a lot of the times people are like, well, I want passive income or generational wealth, but we have to start a lot earlier before we can get to those points, right? We need to have a better understanding of, how much are you making? So when it comes to looking for that financial planner, it's important to know what type of financial planner or financial advisor you're speaking to, because there are ones, some who work in like an area where insurance, so they're really insurance based, or sometimes if they work in a wirehouse or a broker dealer, they're more investments based. So you also need to understand what you're looking for and where you are in your financial life. There are different types of financial advisors, but each one can meet you at a certain aspect, or you can try to find somebody who is more in that independent or registered investment advisor area where they have a little bit more flexibility. Some of the common ways that you'll see financial advisors charge are they'll do like a flat fee or an hourly fee, or sometimes they'll do like a percentage of your investment assets. And then maybe you don't have investment assets outside of your employer retirement plan, right? So you want to make sure that you're able to talk to people to understand, hey, what can you add as a value to me, to my life, if I don't have those assets as well. But when it comes to the financial planning process for our clients, the first place we start is we talk about their goals. And we really want to dig deep in that. So we want to get a better understanding of, like, in a perfect world, if you think about 2 to 3 years from now, where do you want your financial life to be? Where do you want your kids to be? How do you want to feel about finances, right? Like, what type of mindset and behaviors do you want to build? And then also think about maybe some of the things that you saw that you didn't like in life, and how do you want to change that? How do you want to combat a lot of those maybe negative experiences with money to have now more positive experiences with money? Then we also look at your cash flow, because if you don't know where your money is going, then a lot of this is just, it doesn't matter. We have to understand where your money is going, where it should be going, where you're saving and investing, because that is also part of building wealth and strategizing. And then of course, pivoting along the way, right? And I think that's the best thing, is life is going to life. So having that advisor or having that financial planner that can help you adapt and shift as things change in your life is really, really helpful. So you'll feel confident. So that's a little bit about our financial planning process as well.
Thank you. Thank you. You would be, or I guess you wouldn't be shocked to know you see this every day, but people really just don't know what financial planning is. And it can be this nebulous term because people can think of finance in so many different ways. Okay, so Portia, similarly for you, walk me through the estate planning process. How much does it cost? When should you start? Is it ever too early or too late to start? And what documents need to be provided to get the ball rolling on that conversation?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and take those piece by piece, right? So when to start estate planning? This is something that most people have a misconception about. They think it's either when they have a whole lot of money or when they're really old and they're thinking about passing away. The reality is, in our society, once you become a legal adult, you need baseline estate planning, period. So that means at 18 years old, you need baseline estate planning. You no longer have a legal guardian like children do, right? Where their parents are their legal representatives to step up if something happens. At 18, our kids are their own legal representatives. And if they don't have a basic plan that says, if I'm in a car accident, who makes my medical decisions, or who gets access to my bank account, or who can start a lawsuit on my behalf, parents get this really rude awakening where they now have to go ask a judge to be able to take care of their children. And so when we think about estate planning, people get caught up in the money part, but really it's everything that has to do with you. It's while you are alive and after you're gone. So when we think about estate planning, how early is too early? Well, a baby can't do it, right? But we as the parent of that baby can estate plan for them and should. We need to pick guardians for them. We need to figure out making sure that we have appropriate financial resources for them. So that might be life insurance, that may be other vehicles that Chelsea will talk about going down, right? We need to make sure that those vehicles are covered. And that's going to be a trust, because you can't leave a life insurance policy to a baby or to a child, right? Anyone under the age of 18. So we estate plan for our children. And when they hit 18, we need to make sure that they start estate planning for themselves. Now, an 18-year-old's estate plan is very is unlikely to look like any of our estate plans, right? When we say estate planning, it is unique to your circumstances. Much like Chelsea talked about, it is your family structure. So are you married? Are you single? Do you have minor children? Do you have adult children? Are you in a blended family? Are you a caregiver for someone who is incapacitated, an older adult, or maybe a child or sibling, or someone who's incarcerated? All of those family structure elements will impact what your estate plan looks like, because it will have to be planned around to make sure that we can protect the assets. The second thing is going to be, what are the assets, right? Do you own real estate? Do you own businesses? Do you have your W-2 income? What does your estate entail? Because there are parameters per state based on the value of your estate and the types of assets that exist inside of it. So that's going to impact what your estate plan looks like. And then the last piece, which is really important, is your goals. What are you trying to achieve? You may have a blended family and you may have not a ton of assets, but you might be trying to preserve wealth to make sure that there is at least a baseline going down the road so that your kids or your grandkids have something to step up with. You may look at more comprehensive planning than, say, what your balance sheet suggests, because you're trying to create something down the road. And that's where you tack in with, a Chelsea, and you bring in the life insurance, or you bring in some other vehicles that create that kind of liquidity that can be sustained. So what does that process look like? Generally in our office, it's people come in and we do an evaluation specific to their circumstances under those three parameters. What is your family structure? What are the assets? What are we trying to achieve? What do you want, right? When you think about 6 generations down the road, what does that garden look like, right? Is it your family that's continuing to eat the apples from the seeds that you planted? Or is it somebody else's family and your kids are just tilling the land? What does it look like? Because the reality is that it's going to be one or the other. They either own it or they work it, but it's not going to be both, right? So it's up to us to decide today what that looks like for them, because we have the ability to control that based on planning. From there, we set up the structure that meets those goals and objectives. There's going to be baseline planning depending on what your assets are, depending on what your family structure is, and that baseline is going to change depending on those two things, right? And then once we do that, we start to create the plan. We work with people like Chelsea, we work with your CPAs, we work with other people to collaborate and make sure that the plan is functioning the way that we want it to. And then it's about reviews. You want to make sure that you are reviewing your plan, because like Chelsea said, life is lifing, right? People are born, people die, people get divorced, people sell assets, all kinds of things come up throughout the course of your life. So your estate plan is never a one and done. It's not static. It's something you have to keep in touch with, right? You want to be able to touch it, to talk about it, to feel it, because you want it to work for you. Not only does life be life, but laws change. Presidents change, Congress changes, and those laws that impact our wealth change significantly. A big one that I think affects everybody on this call is the Secure Act that passed in 2019 as a bipartisan act that then subsequently went Secure Act 2.0, which most people don't realize decimated your ability to create intergenerational wealth for your children. because it changed how they could have a lifetime stretch. It doesn't exist anymore. And now I'm getting too into the weeds, but it's things like that where we need to then say, oh, this is a huge problem. What we thought we were doing in contributing to these retirement accounts to pass wealth and intergenerational wealth now doesn't exist because of this law change. And we need to tweak what we do with these funds to try to continue to have that that change. And so, you know, I have a lot of clients who are buying real estate and self-directing their IRAs to go into assets that have a better inheritance opportunity and tax benefits. So it just depends. And having your wealth building team is incredibly important. What does it cost? I often tell people you get what you pay for, right? You can have the full spectrum. There are people who will tell you they will do a trust for you for $500. There are people who will tell you they will do a trust for you for $30,000. And most people find themselves somewhere in the middle, anywhere from about the $5,000 to $8,000 range for comprehensive planning. When you start to add in additional things, you might be looking at corporate structures, you may be looking into maybe you have special needs planning or other things that you want to do intergenerationally with your plan. And it can go up from there depending on what you're looking to do, if you're not a citizen or your beneficiaries, et cetera. But on average, I think it's reasonable to expect that if you're getting comprehensive multi-generational planning, that you're going to be on average in about probably the $6,000 to $8,000 range. Sorry, was there more to that question? Because I feel like I got it.
No, I was sitting here thinking now, do I unmute now? Because she we
I
can
just have to talk forever, as you know.
we can put the benediction for it because both of you just answered it so well. I'm going to try to sum it up briefly for people. So financial planning, it's more of what you're doing in your life right now and looking at the big picture of, are you in a position to handle the things that come at you financially? Estate planning is, how do you get that to go beyond just your life? And how do you set things up so that it's intergenerational wealth? For both scenarios, you need someone who will help you plan and think through your goals and then turn that into action and structure. It's also not a one and done thing. You will update it as your life changes and as laws change, and you get what you want, what you pay for, which I think applies to anything. You put your money where your mouth is. I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again. We started having some questions come in. So without knowing it, Portia, you answered one of the first questions is, how much should that cost? What goes into it and when you should do it. So she covered how much it costs, 500 to 30,000. Start soon. You can start. It can be for a newborn baby. They just don't really have the rights or power or authority until they're 18. And what goes in it depends on what you are trying to get out of it, what you have, what is your setup financially.
And Jay, if I could just add to that, what goes into it. The easiest way to think about it, right, is think about the rappers when they talk about, I ain't got nothing in my name, right? Anything that's titled in your name, you want to make sure is retitled in the name of your trust. Because if it's titled in your name and you pass away, nobody has the legal right to take it out of your name. So you then would have to, or your family, because you're gone, would have to go to a judge, because the judge is the only entity that has the legal authority to transfer things out of your name. Now, obviously, that is not the same for assets that are beneficiary designated and things like that. But what we find is, if you've got a home and your home is titled in your name and you pass away, only a judge can change the title to that home, right? Unless you've done it by transferring it into the name of your trust while you are alive and designating who's legally able to manage that trust after you're gone. So when we think about assets, it doesn't matter what you have. If anything's in your name, the idea is you want it out of your name and in the name of your trust, so that when you hear people say you own nothing but control everything, is not exactly correct, because anyway, you still own it, but you own it and you control it, but it's separated from you and not your personal name. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then if anyone ever tells you they can do a trust for you for $500, run, please run very, 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 very quickly. We have 3 probates that we have going on right now for trusts that came out of these kinds of trust mills. And it is so bad that even the judge said it would be better if there had been no trust at all. because of the level of confusion, the incorrect law that was used, outdated law, like all this stuff. And the judge was like, we can't even invalidate it because it's signed, but the distribution is going to cost this family so much more money just because it was done wrong. And you add in the added court fees, plus the fact that people are fighting, there's not going to be much left of that estate. And it is completely contrary to what the people were trying to do, right? Please hear us when we say you get what you pay for, and it can be incredibly expensive on the back end.
And Portia, as you're mentioning that, when you say those trust mills, you're talking about those, even some of those online tools that sometimes people attempt to use, right?
Oh my gosh, the Susie Orman trusts, they are so bad. I'm sorry, Susie Orman, don't sue me, but they're just so bad. And there's not enough guidance for people, and you don't know what you don't know. So the reality is if you walk into a situation and you're trying to create something yourself, or Rocket Lawyer or Susie Orman or any of these places, you're not a lawyer. And it says in the fine print, because the small, the big print giveth, right? $500. Small print, take it away. And what it says at the bottom is that we are not lawyers. Please make sure that you consult a lawyer, because we do not guarantee that this is legally viable. It says it at the bottom. So it's like people don't ever read that, but it says it right there in the fine print. We are not standing by these documents, and we won't. You have to then go see a lawyer, and no lawyer is going to review what you did on an online app, because they can't take on the liability for your lack of knowledge. You end up having to pay multiple times for something you can just go to someone and get done well once. So I wanted to bring that home, because I literally was in probate court this morning, and the judge was like, this is horrible that these systems are allowed to exist, because they take advantage of people who lack the literacy to know the difference.
Thank you for sharing that example. And Portia and Chelsea have they have bountiful examples of the unbelievable and yet sad things that happen when someone takes I said TikTok, but LegalZoom, or any of the, if in general, the discernment to know if it seems too good to be true, question it. It doesn't mean that it absolutely isn't true, but have some type of discernment. Do it for your own good. Okay, so Chelsea, the theme for tonight's webinar is Home for the Holidays. And we wanted to do this right before everyone goes home for the holidays, if they are going home. One, we hope you all have safe travel mercies and have great meals. But two, we want people to feel empowered to have this conversation. And a lot of times people will avoid these conversations. Now, we know it's not these wonderful people in the audience, because they're here, they're alert, they're asking questions, the questions are coming in, and we're going to get to them. But for the people that they go home to their families, and their families say, well, I'm afraid of that. It's going to jinx me. If I talk about this, then I'm going to go to an early grave, or it costs too much, or I have this, what I hear all the time. I had this one friend, and they set this thing up, and then Jib Bob came and he took all their money. And the extreme versions of what happens when someone has a lack of understanding, or they have an excessive fear, which is understandable. How do you help people get over this? Again, this is for Chelsea. How do you help people get over these concerns and fears using a fact-based approach, and kind of giving them the assurance they need to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever people come, and when we get to this aspect of their financial plan, where it's time to talk about estate planning, and it's time to, introduce them to an attorney, it is not the most enjoyable conversation. Portia, you are making it enjoyable, but it is not always a very enjoyable conversation. So it's also kind of tough, because people have to think about, the end of their lives, or not being there for their children. And that's just not a fun thing that you want to think about. But the best thing that I've seen with a lot of our clients is, what could happen if we don't have this conversation, right? Like, what will happen in that case? And it's really important that we can have these tough conversations, and remember that we are coming from a place of empathy and understanding, but also protection of your family too is really important. I always like to tell the story about, so two of my grandparents, my grandmother, I talked to her about estate planning one Thanksgiving. She said, Chelsea, it doesn't matter. I don't need to deal with it. I was like, Grandma, we really need to do this. Like, we should really have this conversation. Unfortunately, a month and a half later, she passed away. And we weren't able to get any of those estate documents done or anything. And she didn't have a large estate, but the amount of time we spent dealing with probate, I mean, we were in the house going through envelopes, trying to find accounts. It was a very, very challenging experience where after that with my grandfather, we sat down and I said, hey, where are your accounts? Let's just, create a basic balance sheet. Like, what is everything? And then introduced him to an attorney, and he was able to get those documents. He put them in a safe. He let the executor of his estate know where it was in the safe. He let his power of attorney and all the individuals that were important in his documents knew where the balance sheet was. They knew where the documents were held. They knew where the keys to all of the assets were. And literally everything was handled within like 30 days. Everything happened very, very quickly. And it just made for the family that is left there, it just made it so much easier for us because we were already grieving. The last thing we wanted to do was fight and try to find everything and go through probate. So I share that story also with clients because it does really resonate with the people that are important to them, the people that they're leaving behind. And what kind of scenario do you want to leave them in when they're already grieving and mourning, losing you in the first place?
Thank you for sharing that. And you hit the nail on the head. It's hard enough to be grieving and trying to make arrangements for a family member or a loved one. But then to add on top of that, you've got Uncle Sam saying, run me my money. you still need to handle business. And you don't even know what the password is for their online account. You don't know what, because everyone has that like desk or drawer in their home where they just put mail, and you don't know where that's at, or you don't know which piece of mail to go through to get started. And it's just, you already have so much on your plate. So to the extent that you can help your family members have this discussion while you're home for the holidays, if you can help paint the picture, we don't want to, put fear in them. We don't want to be the family member that comes home and everyone says, don't,
On that family member.
yeah,
Right.
you don't get invited back next year because you got on everybody's nerves. But you want to help them understand this is what happens. Auntie, grandma, uncle, whoever, pop, they work so hard to build wealth and to make a difference in this world. And then we're just going to ignore it and not help them sustain that. So we have a few more questions that we're starting to, corral and circle this topic of trust. And I'm going to send it back to you, Portia. It's a few questions, so I'm going to throw them at you and you can decide how to answer it. Can you dictate the differences between trust and wills, which is more beneficial? How can you maximize, and this actually I'm going to save down for a little later. And is it better to have your trust as your beneficiary or a specific person? So help us have more trust in what happens with trust, please, Portia.
Yeah. Okay. Trust versus will. A will is a one-way ticket to probate court, and a trust, if properly funded and executed, avoids court entirely. It's the easiest way to do it. They are both distribution documents. They both say where your things go, who you want them to go to, right? But a will has to be certified by a judge, which means it must still go through probate court, which is subject to then the timelines of probate and leaves a judge in charge of transferring those assets and allows the estate plan to be challenged because it is still all of the public process of probate. Whereas a trust, if properly funded and executed, never needs to go through probate. Ever. So you completely avoid the cost, the time, and expense, both physically, emotionally, economically, of probate court. So that on its face is one of the biggest differences between a will and a trust. There are things that are called testamentary trust or testamentary wills, essentially, or testamentary trust, where they are basically inside of your will and it creates a trust for your beneficiaries, but that is still done through the court. And so if one of the big goals is to avoid court interference and the expense that comes along with that, both time and economic expense, then a trust is going to be the most beneficial. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody needs a trust, right? Your economic circumstances, as well as your family circumstances, as well as your goals, are what's going to dictate whether that matters. For different states, there is a threshold for what is sort of considered to be a small estate versus one that requires a full probate. In a state like California, if your gross value is over about $200,000 gross, so everything you own regardless of your debt, then it mandates a full probate. If you own real estate, it mandates a full probate. In a state like Maryland, if the spouse is, if the beneficiary is a spouse, then it's about $100,000 gross. If it's a spouse beneficiary, but if it's a child or a child and a spouse, it's $50,000. So if your gross estate is more than $50,000, then you likely would want a trust to avoid the probate process. If it's less than that, then a will may be sufficient to pass because you can go through what's called sort of a small estate probate, which is much easier to get through, but it also means that there's less than $50,000 gross. So that's everything you own, regardless of any debt. And so what's the big difference? Trust gives you full control. A will still leaves the court in control. And it's important to note that if you have a trust, you still also have a will. And I just want to make sure that people are clear about that. It's just not a last will and testament. It's what we call a pour over will. It's a catch-all document to make sure that if you've left any assets outside of your trust by accident, that they're going to be covered and be able to get transferred into that trust. And also, if you have minor kids, that's where permanent guardianship is named, is inside of that pour over will. And it also says if for some reason your trust should ever become invalidated, the laws change and anything like that, that your distribution should remain the same as what it was inside of your trust. And so that's all it says. It doesn't distribute assets or anything else. It just transfers things and catches what's there. But when you have a trust, you should also have a pour over will.
You got it. And without even knowing it, there were other questions that came in as you started to answer that question, where you just answered it. That's how good you are. People were asking, which has more weight, which is more important, a trust or will, and you thank you for explaining that clearly. Okay, so we're going to go back to you, Chelsea, and this is talking about tax planning. So how can we maximize financial planning and or estate planning to decrease tax liability and create a strong tax shelter, especially as we get to the end of the year? We're trying to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. People, and it's all Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority is not a 501c3 the way it is established. We have the Pearl and Ivy Educational Foundation. I'm just doing a shameless but not so shameless plug where you can make donations. So how can people prepare to make tax-based decisions to reduce their liability? How can financial planning go into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to clarify, there are two types of taxes that we're about to talk about. So there's year-end tax planning that we are all personally going through right now. And then there is estate tax planning, which is a whole nother beast. And there is a federal estate tax exemption. There are individual state tax exemptions that are going to be very specific to each of you. So you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of which one we're looking for. So if we're talking about year-end tax planning, this is where we have a little bit more control in regard to our income, in regard to deductions and credits that we can do to maximize at the end of the year, looking at open enrollment, looking at your HSA, your 401k, looking at opportunities where you can reduce your taxable income on top of if you have rental properties or if you own a business. Now, if we're talking about the estate tax and planning around that, first and foremost, you want to understand how big your estate is, and then also understanding the assets that you have available. Portia, I'm sure, can touch on a little bit more, but about, the different types of assets that you can utilize, which ones are applicable for the estate tax, which ones aren't, and then how you can really select a strategy of where the money is going to minimize that burden on your behalf. It's important, though, because as Portia was mentioning too, the laws are changing quite a bit. So, I know before, they were talking about getting rid of step up in basis, which was when if you leave an asset to your heirs, they get the purchase price or the new value will be based on your date of death. There's been potential conversation about that changing, right? So there's an ever-changing landscape in regard to the estate tax, and then probably personally in each of your states as well. But Portia, I would cue it over to you on what are some of the strategies that you see that a lot of your clients utilize if they are up against that exemption, I guess.
Yeah. So let's sort of be clear about what the exemption is, right? So federally speaking, it's about $12 million per person, essentially, right? So if you are above $12 million as an individual, then we're looking at how do we reduce whatever is above and beyond that 12 million to minimize your estate tax exemption. In California, which is where our main office is, we don't have a state estate tax, right? In Maryland, it's about $6 million. So there is less room, right? We are going to be taxed to the state of Maryland above that number, even though you're lower than the federal number. So what some of our clients will do, depending on how far above, we might look at charitable remainder trusts. They may have an organization, right, like the AKAs, that they want to support after they've passed on. And so they'll set up something called a charitable remainder trust, where their assets or some of their assets will benefit someone for their lifetime. So they pass away, they benefit their kids or their grandkids, depending on who they want. And after those kids pass away or that grandkid passes away, the remainder of that amount will go to that charity. And they can actually get some tax benefits while they are alive on their actual income taxes because they've secured and pledged those funds for charity, but also it can reduce their taxable amount when it comes to passing the assets. Some other strategies have been, people have actually been gifting, right? Because the estate tax exemption is really high right now, it is set to sunset. People don't seem to realize that it got this high because of Donald Trump's tax plan in 2018. He doubled the federal estate tax exemption from where it was and then indexed it for inflation. And so it's been going up, but that is going to stop. It is set to sunset in 2026. So essentially, it is almost over, right? And so people are gifting assets to their kids right now because we don't know where that estate tax exemption is going to go once it comes down. Congress could vote to continue it. They could vote to reduce it. They could vote to eliminate it. We have absolutely no idea where they're going to go, and they are not giving us many indications about where they're going to go. There's a big battle, right? Because there's a lot of people in Congress who benefit from this exemption being so high. But with that being said, people are gifting because you will end up being grandfathered in under this current exemption rate. So let's say it's at 12 million now. You've got $12 million. You gift 10 of it away to your kids into an irrevocable trust or something of that nature. And the exemption goes down to $2 million. Well, all that's left in your estate is $2 million. You won't be taxed on that remaining two, right? Because it would be under the exemption at the time of your passing. And what you passed away under the previous law would be basically grandfathered in under the previous law. So people are looking at gifting. People are looking at transferring into corporations. So like I said, with some retirement accounts and other assets, they're leveraging, right? Leveraging against their investment accounts, taking money out on a loan, which is tax-free, buying other assets, either in businesses or giving them as loans to their children and other things so that they can accumulate land and buy assets that they're going to need to set them up for the future. And again, minimizing the taxes on those transfers. And then when they die, right, the kids get the step up in tax basis on those investments, and they can sort of rinse and repeat for their children. This is going into the weeds again, Jay, sorry. But from a tax strategy standpoint, there's a lot of different options. And much like Chelsea mentioned, it really depends on what your estate value is, what the asset categories are, what types of assets are in your estate, because different assets have different benefits and different strategies. And then again, what is the goal? Some people are like, I'm going to spend all my money by the time I die, which is a really bad plan. Some people are like, I want to give everything to charity. And it's like, great, we can definitely minimize your estate taxes, right, by these charitable strategies. And some people are like, I want to make sure that 6 generations beyond me, my family is still thriving and nobody has to take out debt for a house or, for school, and nobody has to be involved in this really abusive banking system, right? Like some people, that's their goal. And depending on what your individual goal is, we can create a strategy for that. There is no one size fits all. And I think it's really important for people to know that there's no one sort of like, here's the strategy, right? There are no perfect products. There are only perfect plans. And that perfect plan is really the one that is related to you and you specifically.
Thank you both. I like how you handed it off so naturally. I was like double dutch. You just knew when to hop in. I'm going to address a few questions that came up while you were talking, because even though the question, again, you answered it without knowing it, but there was a question of what cannot go into a trust. Is it possible to open a trust without your spouse? If you are married, like, can you bypass your spouse? Almost like, hey, can you, the way people y'all said, almost like, can you file your tax, the married filing separately, which is one of the least beneficial tax statuses. And then if you own property in multiple states, how does that work? So the short answer, because while we do want you to ask questions, we want to make sure you don't get one-off advice without seeing the big picture. The best way to move forward is to have a conversation with Chelsea, with Portia, because then they can give you a better answer, a more specific answer. Portia mentioned it earlier. These are tailored. It's not a perfect plan. It's not a perfect one size fits all for everybody. It's a perfect plan for that individual. So then you can discuss like, okay, well, based on, what's going on with you and your spouse, this is what you can do, or based on the states that you have property in, or this is what you can and cannot do. You want to have that conversation when all cards are on the table, not just when it's like, one-off chat. But I do appreciate, for those of you that ask those questions, I appreciate you asking them. We are getting to our last few questions. So this next one comes from Christina Williams. And this one, I will say, we'll start with Chelsea, but we can go to Portia as well, because Portia, you just had a lot to say. So I want you to have a chance to sip some water and relax, like you're giving us, y'all are giving us all the information. Okay, so this is a question for people who are post-grad. When I'm picturing the young living the fabulous city life in your 20s. What can be done to best prepare when you're in that? I got student loan debt. I go to places where, maybe I can get the best deal on meals, and that's okay. We were all there. I'm not married. I'm debating whether I'm going to buy or rent. This just in, student loans did not get canceled. So it's not just in, that's been around. And so October 1st came around the corner and I owed, money on my student loans. And I'm also just trying to have a fabulous life. So what advice do you have for someone who is in that post-grad, early in their wealth building, wealth accumulation stage of life?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to just understand that this is a phase of life, right? And it is a difficult one when you're transitioning from graduation to post-grad, adulting, everything that falls under the sun there. And the most important thing that you want to do, and the best thing that I did was I actually I sat down and I wrote everything out. What was I responsible for? What did I have? And it was a really helpful way to just take inventory. And it was the first time I had also seen my finances in that capacity. And that's also called like a net worth statement. So you take a look at, do you have a 401k? Do you have an HSA? What are the accounts that you have through your employer? Then look at what do you have in regard to student loans? What do you have in regard to credit cards? And looking at the interest rate on each of those loans as well, because that will tell you how fast these suckers are growing. Because if they're growing pretty quickly, you really want to make sure that you're prioritizing that, because if you're paying the minimums or you're paying the small amount, it's going to continuously grow. I remember one of my friends when in our first job after college, she's like, Chelsea, I keep paying it and nothing is happening. And I was like, well, you're paying the minimum. That's why. And it's 29% interest. So you have to understand, how money works, how compound interest works, negatively with credit cards and student loans, or positively when it comes to investing. And that's really how we can utilize that as a tool to build wealth. But after we understand all of that, then you have to look at, what are your fixed expenses? What do you need to get by throughout the month? And then how can you prioritize you? Because if you don't prioritize you, no one else will. So how can we make sure that you're still paying yourself? So that includes like saving, making sure you have a plan for the rainy day, making sure you're paying enough on your loans, more than the minimum, to make sure that they're not continuously growing. And then understanding, how much is left over. And then if you don't have a lot left over, that's okay. But think about then, what are other ways that you can generate more income in your life? Because you probably have some really awesome skills. So how can you utilize those skills to maximize your earning potential? Maybe you've maximized it at work already, but I'm sure that there's a small business or someone else who would really like to utilize that tool as well. So it's important to understand how that works, but then also really making sure you're investing, because there's one thing in life that is going to happen outside of death, is we're all going to want to retire or stop working in some capacity. And you cannot take a loan out for retirement. So you want to make sure that you're putting money aside for that day. And you can do that through a 401k or a 403b if your employer provides it. If not, that's okay. You can open what's called an individual retirement account. You can give me a call and I'd be happy to help you through this. But making sure that you're putting money aside that has the capacity to appreciate or to grow over time is the beauty of investing, and making sure that you're set up for that time when you want to sit on the beach.
And look, knowing me, I'm like, I want to sit on the beach now.
Yeah.
But the commercials that come on during the daytime, it's my money and I want it now. But we have to wait. We have to save. Okay, so we are at the bottom of the hour, the last 8 minutes, actually now 7 minutes. So we're going to wrap it up, but we got a few more questions, and so I'm going to tie them together in a way that it can kind of be our final thoughts. Where you turn, you look at a different camera, and you say, "In closing today." We only have one camera, but we're just doing Zoom virtual. But if we were to turn and give that serious final thoughts, and we'll start with you, Portia. This is kind of a question of what, and actually it's for both of you, what resources, or kind of if I wanted to start right away today, what advice do you have to either help someone have these conversations as they go home? I know we shared a lot today, or for themselves, if they're not ready to have the conversation with others, but they just want to start with themselves. And we are going to share Chelsea, and for the people in the audience, we will share Chelsea and Portia's information so that you can follow up with them after the call. But this is just the final thought of what can someone do to get started today for themselves or for their family? Starting with Portia.
Yeah. I would say education, right? Getting educated, making sure that we're taking the steps to learn what is possible. So much of the reason why I feel like people don't plan is they don't know what they don't know. You just don't know what's possible. You don't know what you're facing. And so we actually have a platform called the Black Trust Fund Kids. It's blacktrustfundkids.com. We have a free resource library. We've got classes, courses, and all kinds of things of information to help people understand what is possible so that you can start to think about what you want to do with your own estate. From an estate planning standpoint, there are 3 basics that everybody over the age of 18 must have in their estate plan today, right? The first is going to be your property power of attorney, or durable power of attorney, or uniform statutory power of attorney. Depends on where you live, right? It has a different name. But it's a document that legally authorizes someone to step up for you in the event you can't handle your own affairs. So if you're in a car accident, stroke, heart attack, anything where you're alive, but you can't pay your own bills, you can't make decisions, someone has to be legally authorized to do it for you, right? And either you decide who that is by creating a power of attorney, or a judge must decide through a conservatorship or guardianship proceeding. There is no alternative. Even if you are married, your spouse is not automatically able to step up in that role. Number 2 is going to be your medical directives. Who is legally empowered to make your medical decisions? It is the same concept. The moment we turn 18 or become emancipated minors, nobody is automatically able to make these decisions for us. We either give that power to someone in the event of our incapacity, or a judge has to make a determination of who gets that power, right? Those first 2 things that I just mentioned have absolutely nothing to do with how much money you have in your bank account. It has everything to do with you maintaining your dignity and autonomy and determining what happens to you if you have an illness or accident, right? The third thing is everybody here needs a distribution plan. And as I mentioned before, we don't all need the same distribution plan. That's where things vary. That's where it's important to understand what your options are. But you must have a distribution plan because the state has a distribution plan for each and every one of us. It's the default plan. So in reality, everybody here has an estate plan. You just have the estate plan that the state has designated for you, which does not serve your family, does not take into consideration who you are, what you want, or what your values are. And it takes your money to fund them for using their plan, all because we didn't do something, right? So when we ask what's the next right step, those 3 things everybody in this room needs to have. More complex estate planning we can build upon along the way, but you need those 3 things. The other thing is get educated. It is free. It is free to go and get good information. Chelsea's got information. I've got information. There's, Jay has information. There's a ton of information that you can get from trusted sources. Please dig into it, because the only person who can step up and do this for you is you. Nobody else can do it for you. And I would say that the last piece is something you can do right now after this call. Check your beneficiary designations. Just log into your bank account and see if there's a beneficiary designated. Log into your investment account, your life insurance, all of these things. Because if you don't have a beneficiary designated, then somebody has to go to court. And Too many times people have ex-spouses, they have their siblings, they have an old boyfriend, all kinds of stuff because they said it and they forget it. That's something you can do today after this call to make sure at least that bare minimum is going to go to the right people. And just a little sidebar, if you have minors named, they cannot inherit from you directly. It will have to go through a court process for somebody to be designated to manage that for them. And if you have your parent or sister or someone else named for your minor, they are just receiving those assets directly into their estate and have no obligation to give it to your child. That is not a good way to leave your assets either, no matter how much you trust them. So please double check. It's free again. It's something you can do right now today, and it can have a huge impact on your family security. But yeah, that's what I would say. Get educated and take the next right step.
Awesome. And then I would also say beneficiary designations. That's actually something that I've been doing with all of my clients, especially because of open enrollment. Maybe you got a new job, you're rolling over that old 401k into your new one, making sure your beneficiary designations are set up. And, you know, that's something I did literally today with a client where we sat down. I was like, we're going through Bank of America, next is Ally, next is Fidelity. We're going to make sure we have a primary and a contingent for every single person as well, every single account as well. But I think when you're having the conversation, you really want to make sure you're starting off with positive intentions. And I think just sharing that you were on this webinar, even when I started to have the conversation with family members, I would say, hey, you know, I just listened to a webinar with Portia and she told me about getting a trust for my kids. Have you thought about that before? Have you had that? And coming from a place instead of like scolding of like, oh, you need a trust, but I was like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Have you thought about this? Like, maybe we can think about this together as a family, because I'm trying to figure out what my goals are. Well, what do we want our legacy as a family to be? And it just really comes from an open place of like not scolding or chastising, but like, hey, I'm happy to be a thought partner with you on this because I'm trying to figure it out too. So that's a really, I think, a welcoming way as you're going home for the holidays. If it's like a sister or mother or grandparent, if you want to start opening the conversation, just start saying like, hey, I'm figuring it out too. Let's do it together.
There you go. It's just a matter of being kind, supportive, starting the discussion. You don't have to have everything done by the time the turkey comes out of the oven. Thank you all for participating. You always have so much information to share. This concludes the Q&A portion. We are now going to turn it back to Tony, our hostess for the evening, to wrap us up.
Wow, ladies, that was an excellent discussion. I learned so much during that, but I will say, I think to wrap it up a little bit, the most important lessons is that you need to start estate planning ASAP. Whether you're a kid, that means your parents need to do it. If you're an adult, then you need to do it. Super important to have those conversations, right? But I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Jay, Chelsea, and Portia, for educating us on making smart financial decisions. And as we wrap up tonight's program, I invite you to stay connected with our panelists. So as you all can see, our contact information for our panelists is listed right here. And then also you'll see at the bottom of the screen, we have the contact information for the Xi Omega chapter. So be sure to follow us on social media so you can keep up with our upcoming events. And it has been my pleasure being your host this evening. On behalf of everyone who executed this program and helped to plan it, thank you so much. And I hope that you guys took away lots of lessons from this.
Yo, B.